In December 2021, I received an unexpected email that rendered me completely speechless. This email notified me that I was one of just a handful of musicians who was being given the chance to perform on one of the surviving violins from the Holocaust and prison camps. Having recently learned from DNA tests just how much Jewish I had in me unknowingly all my life, this email had an even greater meaning to me. To back up, the Long Beach Symphony, where I have played in the violin section since 1994, originally was scheduled to perform a concert with Violins of Hope in April of 2020. However, society shut down due to COVID and the concert was postponed. The collection of Violins of Hope are violins which were played in and survived concentration camps during the Holocaust. There are about 60 violins in the collection. Only approximately 10 could be restored to playing condition. The remaining violins were so badly damaged they are not playable. They can always be seen on display when the collection goes on tour. When the Violins of Hope concert was rescheduled, I honestly expected I would be one of the players that would be near one of the historic violins. I thought, at best, I would be walking by the instruments or maybe be lucky enough to sit near one during the concert. In the email, I was told which violin was assigned to me, should I accept: the Bielski Violin. This was very real indeed, and there was no question about whether or not I would accept this opportunity. My answer was an unequivocal yes. 2 nights before our first rehearsal, I attended a donor event where we officially received the violins. The event was held in the aquarium in Long Beach, inside the IMAX theater. Anita Pressman, a friend of over 2 decades, was my guest. She took some snapshots of some key moments. When I entered the IMAX theater, I was taken back when I saw the collection of violins on display for the donors to view. I went straight to the violin assigned to me so I could see it up close before the event began. It is one thing to read about these violins. It's entirely a different experience to actually walk up and view the violin I knew I would be going home with for the rest of the week. Before the handful of musicians formally received our violins, we watched a short documentary on the violins. This 90-second video clip taken from my iPhone grabbed my heart and drew me further into the moment, helping me understand what was about to happen.
I want to wish you all that this project will give you a new impression of what happened in the camps and what the meaning of the word hope is. And this is so important to me that this project is seen by thousands of people, and this, I hope, is opening your heart between everyone to everything, and to remember the horrible day, the people that were waiting for one sign of a hope, for one time that tomorrow will be another day, much better, this wonderful, wonderful feeling. And you have no idea what was the meaning of something like that in the horrible time of the Holocaust. This is unbelievable, and I hope that this connection, this minute that you have with these violins will give you hope for everything. Thank you very much, and enjoy it, and take everything that you can take it for yourself, for your friends, for the world. And let's think about it, that never again, never it will come again that people will need to be in camps.
The musicians were given the violins in a very particular way. a serious ceremony that reflected the gravity and responsibility of receiving this historic violins from Violins of Hope. At the end of the short documentary, a speaker read the history of each violin, one by one, then announced the name of the musician assigned to the violin. The musician took an empty case to the front, where they placed the assigned violin inside. When I started hearing the story of the Bielski Violin, I knew it was my turn. My heart began pounding. As I listened to the history, I could feel that this experience was the start of a defining moment in my life. Suddenly, head knowledge was turning into reality. No longer was I reading about history. Now I was about to actually touch history and bring it home. The gravity of the responsibility began hitting me hard.
It was originally constructed in 1870 and played by an Ashkenazi Jew, one of the klezmoria musicians of Eastern Europe. They were self-made and self-taught instrumentalists who displayed a natural talent for their craft. As many arts were not encouraged in strict Jewish tradition, music became one of the few venues for artistic expression. This instrument, hand-chosen by Amnon, is dedicated to the Bielski partisans who fought fiercely to save over 1,200 Jews from the onslaught of German SS units near Novogrudok. Asela Weinstein, Amnon's wife, is the daughter of Asel Bielski, one of the three brothers who formed the Bielski Brigade in Belarus. This was memorialized in the 2008 film Defiance. This violin is being played by violinist Dynell. Dynell, I'm so sorry.
When my name was actually announced, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I walked to the table and helped gently put the violin in my own violin case. It didn't matter that I had known about this moment long in advance. It didn't matter how much research I had done in the past couple of weeks. There was absolutely no way to prepare me for receiving a Holocaust violin and putting it into my violin case, zipping it up, and walking off stage. My hands shook, and I was sure people in the audience could see my heart just jumping out as I walked away. After the receiving ceremony, a photographer took portraits of the musicians with the violins. We were instructed to, once we had received the violins one by one, to immediately go off stage where a professional photographer would take our profile photos with the violin. After the photo shoot, we attended the champagne reception. I made sure to get a photo with Anita and I holding the violin together so she could give a copy to her dad before I made anything public about even having the violin in my possession. It meant a lot to me that I could at least do this much for her and her dad. Following the reception, on the way out to my car, I eyed the huge sea bass tank in the aquarium. In my mind, I was thinking, my moment, my rules. This won't ever happen again. With that thought in mind, I ran right past security and did a quick pose with the violin next to the sea bass tank. A couple of days later, as I was practicing on the Bielski violin at home, I had a realization. I did not want to miss a single moment of this special week. In fact, I wanted to document it, and I wanted to do it right. I wanted a photo shoot with this violin, and I wanted to video record something. The idea was originally for me, my own personal record of the week, my own video journal. At the time, I never expected to be asked to publicly write about my experience. At first, I imagined an iPhone shoot and an iPhone recording, something very simple. But those around me encouraged me to ask for expert help. But who would be available on such a last-minute project? My two-time Emmy-winning cousin, Scott Weber, is a big-time sound engineer. Surely he would be too busy. Barbara Porter, my longtime friend and colleague, now a professional photographer, I was sure she would be too busy. An accompanist of mine I've used over the years, Brian Pizzoni, I was equally certain he went at halftime. Surprise! Before I could even finish a sentence, they all said yes. The only detail left was where to record and what to record. I put a couple of calls out, and Jim and Colleen Thatcher graciously opened their home to all three of us. All that was left was deciding what to play. The recording was going to be the next day. I chose to play Liebeslied by Fritz Kreisler, Love's Joy, Love's Sorrow. As I was hatching this plan, other musicians were also getting used to their violins. Of course, no two violins are alike. We have played our own violins. Violins are like siblings. They can look alike, but have two entirely different personalities and ways of communicating. To switch to a different violin with a different feel or different thickness, even a different tone quality, different placements of notes, and to get comfortable in time for a concert, those posed some fun challenges. Taking that into consideration, it seemed rather gutsy to add more pressure on myself. Hey, I think I'm going to do a spontaneous video tomorrow to memorialize this week. And what shall I play? For me, this became an extremely personal, even spiritual experience. Because I was recording from my own memories and maybe for some family members, select friends, and violin students, I documented in the video a deeply personal experience. It was one which took my week to a deeper level of appreciation. A special soul came with this violin who made himself very present during the week. Now, I hope I don't lose you here. I don't want to call the experience with this special soul a ghost story because that sounds so Hollywood. However, when playing this violin, I truly felt the presence of a soul filled with so much joy. One who was with me all week long, one who couldn't be more joyful to be part of this collection and being a part of the music that is restored in these violins. This soul contributed to my week every bit as much as every musician I performed with. Therefore, I felt as if I needed to, metaphorically, pull up an empty chair for him to sit at my table all week long, and I wanted to include him in my video diary, which I had made for myself. Little did I know I would be asked to write about this for Violinist.com, but since Lori asked me to do so, I have to include my video diary in this story. If you are uncomfortable with the personal, spiritual experience and only want to hear what the Bielski violin sounds like, you can skip ahead in the video so you can hear the Bielski violin sing for 6 million Jews and share the story of hope, love, sorrow, survival, and resilience. Even my students were a part of this defining moment in my life. I have taught violin for over 30 years, and in all my years, I have never seen reactions from students when I pulled out a violin to show them, let them hold, and play for them. These moments were priceless. One violin student said, "Oh my gosh, this is no different than if a museum sent you home with a Declaration of Independence. How can you even sleep at night?" I laughed and replied, "With the violin next to my bed, with one eye open, and with a fire escape plan for every contingency." Another violin student said, "This is the best music, violin, and history lesson I have ever had." During the week leading up to the concert, those of us with the Violin of Hope violins had made sure to share the moment by letting our colleagues, those who were not selected as recipients, to hold the violins and take photos with them at rehearsal. At one rehearsal, the person in charge of overseeing the violins during rehearsal brought a violinist near me a violin case containing a couple of other Violin of Hope violins. There was a minor issue with one violin, so she was letting her choose a different one. I watched as some other musicians in the symphony begged to play on one, and they were told by the caretaker of the violins, if you were not assigned one, you cannot play on one for the rehearsal or the concert. I saw the look in some of the violinists' eyes when they were told that, and reflected back to the time when I thought I would be one of them. Back to when I thought I would be just lucky just to sit near one of these violins, or see it sitting in someone else's case near me. Keeping this in mind is why I would take the violin out of my case and offer it to anyone who came by to look at it so they could hold it and have photos taken with the violin. This was just as historic of a moment for them in this capacity as anything I was experiencing. It felt important that I share that moment with my colleagues who got to perform right alongside with this collection of Holocaust violins. For those of us who had one of these violins and who had been working with the Holocaust violin all week, we had each experienced something profound, even emotional by the time the concert came around. The most common question asked of me was this historically a great violin, or was this actually a great violin? My response has always been, it is not a Stradivarius, nor is it my 300-year-old Italian violin I play on, but it is a violin that comes with a story of more souls than any violin out there. Another question, what was it like to perform with the Violin of Hope collection, all on stage, and each recipient next to each other? Well, normally concerts can feel like just a gig. Not this one though. Saturday night's concert had a feeling unlike any other concert. By Saturday night, each musician had not only touched history, we had brought a piece of history home with us and became a voice of the past through these violins all week long. When the concert had concluded, after performing the Mozart Requiem, we were to return our violins backstage. Returning our assigned violins was not as ceremonious as the donor event where we received them, but it was emotionally powerful. Each musician stood at the loading dock, and one by one, we carefully placed the violin on the designated table. Normally, musicians bolt the moment a rehearsal or concert is done. Getting home is the only thing on our minds. Violinists are notorious for being the first out the door. We can pack up the fastest. But this was different. This was entirely different. This time, many of us stood around watching each other return the violins, taking a photo here and there, lingering near the table, quietly reflecting and sharing stories of the week and what each of us experienced. In all my years as a violinist, and I have played since the age of 2, I've never felt so honored. I've won some competitions. I've traveled internationally both as soloist and section player with orchestras multiple times. I've performed with countless famous people. But this went deeper. This went beyond the realm of cool or the expected. This touched my heart with so much meaning, I never ever found the adequate words to express it. I would have felt honored to play any violin in the Violin of Hope collection, even for just 30 seconds. But to have had my life touched by this violin all week long, in my home, it was an immeasurable experience. In addition to working with a piece of history all week long, I'm so grateful for the efforts of my friends who went along with my crazy idea to take photos of the donor event where we formally received the violins, have a private photo shoot later in the week, and the team coming together to help make a video to document this defining moment in my life. With this event, I realize only in hindsight how the week with the Bielski Violin brought me so much clarity on how I view the world, what is important to me, and even the relationships surrounding me. This week was so meaningful for me on such deeply profound levels, it left no stone unturned. Each time I pulled the Bielski violin out of my violin case to practice on it or perform with it, I was forced to reflect on a deep level about humanity. With some experiences, we don't know how they fully shape or change us until long after the event, when we are reflecting back. Some reveals take days, others weeks. Sometimes we don't realize the impact until months or years later. And yet, I think this moment will continue for me. My perspectives and awarenesses will grow and surface. For me, this is one of those experiences. Playing a violin from the Violins of Hope offered me a deep level perspective on the human story of how life flows and survives individually and collectively, as the soul on the other side, which I speak of in my video, reaffirmed to me, sometime life expresses itself on the other side of the veil as well. Through my experience with the Bielski violin, I learned that each violinist who plays a Violin of Hope violin becomes a storyteller, speaking through the voice of the violin, telling the story of the darkest days and how hope continues long after. Each time a Violin of Hope violin is played, that person serves as a voice for 6 million Jews murdered and thus silenced by the Nazis. From my personal experience, I know that each time the Bielski violin is played, a beautiful soul emerges as one musical voice in the collection of voices, thrilled to bring the story of hope to the world. Being able to express a voice of the past, this particular past, made for the most musically meaningful week I have ever experienced in my musical career. This week with the Bielski violin went straight to my soul. I truly feel that projects like the Violins of Hope will help unite the world in peace, harmony, and love. So before I play my violin that was assigned to me from the Violins of Hope, I want to read a little bit about them so there's a context why I'm playing Liebeslied on this violin. The article is from the Violins of Hope Showcase Stories of the Holocaust. And I won't read the whole thing, but there are some important paragraphs in here, just a little bit of information about the history of the violins, and it talks very specifically about the violin I will be playing on. So I wanted to share that. For close to 3 decades, the Weinsteins have amassed more than 60 violins, giving them a second life, often for free, for a project they call Violins of Hope. The violins come to us in anything but good condition to a bag full of pieces, Avshalom Weinstein recently told the Jewish Boston. We're not only rebuilding these violins, we're keeping the stories of the people who owned or played them alive. And I'll skip over, and feel free to read the rest of the article. The Weinstein's work reflects the violin's fraught Holocaust history. The Germans sadistically organized live concerts in concentration camps, coercing Jewish musicians imprisoned in the Auschwitz to play beautiful, soaring music as new arrivals were selected for work or the gas chambers. I cannot get past that. Violinists were also a common sight in the Jewish ghettos. Many played for scraps of food. Taking into account this tragic history, Violins of Hope took the next step of growing into an educational endeavor. Violins carefully and lovingly refurbished by the Weinsteins have been played in concerts all over the world, including performances by the Berlin Philharmonic and the Cleveland Symphony. However, there were stipulations to performing. The violins have to stay together as a collection, and playing the music of Richard Wagner with them is banned. In addition to participating in concerts, the Weinsteins conducted classes for student performers about the history of the violin they are playing or simply holding in their hands. Avshalom said that more than 60,000 school children across the world have participated in the Violins of Hope event. The collection has also done double duty as a museum exhibit. One of the violins in the collection is especially personal to the Weinsteins, is the Bielski Violin. The instrument is stamped with the telling Star of David and reflects that music was one of the only arts accessible to the Jews. The violin is also dedicated to the Bielski partisans of Belarus who rescued over 1,200 Jews during the war. Avshalom's grandfather was one of the partisans' leader, and his story was the basis of the 2008 film Defiance. The violin is the closest instrument there is to the human voice. It sings, it cries, said Avshalom. Each concert that features the Violins of Hope is a triumph. The violins speak for 6 million people. He added that the instruments carry their owner's physicality. They are worn in the places where they were held on the necks. They carry impressions of people's prints on the fingerboards. Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein have restored these special violins along with the hope they embody as the living links to the past. And one of the reasons why I really went with this article, there's other things written on the violin I'm going to play, which is the Bielski Violin, but I went with this one because of an experience I had with this violin this week. So just remember, living links to the past. One thing about me is I have some gifted tendencies that show up unannounced usually, and I just kind of grew up with them, and I learned with these gifts that life has a flow, and it always has a flow, and when we die, there's still a flow. It doesn't mean that we die, it just means that we left our body. Sometimes when I was a kid, I would just consider a ghost somebody that had a full body amputation. They're still a person. They still wanted to communicate. They still wanted to say, hey, I lived. I'm alive. I'm okay. This is the Bielski violin. So this is the violin that was assigned to me from the Violin of Hope collection and from which I read, which is a very personal violin to them. And I'm going to start off with showing you what this violin looks like, and maybe Scott can do a little bit of a close-up as I turn the violin around. You can see the Star of David on the back and the beautiful edging that's along here. Now, there's something else on this violin that I'm not sure anybody's caught, but we'll find out. There is a person attached to this violin who seems to, at least at this point, want to just say, I'm alive, I lived, I survived. I'm alive, I lived, I survived, and I am with this violin. On my way down to the aquarium where each recipient for the violins showed up at the donor event, I started having unusual experiences where when I was on the cell phone talking to somebody, the electronics on my cell phone began going bananas, and the closer I got to the place where I would receive the violin formally, the more my phone went bananas. We were talking, it would switch from the speaker phone to the car the hands-free link. It would suddenly just go off all of them, and suddenly I couldn't hear the person, and then it would come back on. And at first I was thinking this was a technological issue, and what do you do with iPhones? Every now and then there's a glitch. But I knew I was on my way to pick up a violin that probably had some history and was really important. And I also knew on my way in that these violins, they are part of how people, they speak through them. So I stayed a little bit open-minded. My heart started pounding like, oh my gosh, I started getting even more excited. And when I got into the IMAX Theater section of the aquarium, I rounded the bend, and there was, wall-to-wall Violins of Hope sign. And then underneath it were all the violins that were lined up and for people to view before each recipient received the violin. And I already knew which violin I was going to have, so of course I went right to this one and was checking it out. But everything on my phone started just going bananas. The battery life, where it says you have 25% or 80%, whatever, it started changing. And rapidly. It said, you have 2% left, you have 50% left, you have 39%, oh, you're up to 100, back to 2, and it started jumping all over the place. My apps began freezing, I couldn't open up even my video, and I could feel this energy. So that's when I realized, okay, so I'm dealing with a very excited person who's happy that I can, notice them. So I just had a chat and said, this is really momentous. This is such a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me. This is a historical moment. And would you mind leaving my phone alone? So I had to gently set some boundaries with this ghost. And we came to an agreement that he understood. I heard him. I was acknowledging him. And he left my phone alone. When I got home, and sat down, I was watching TV, just kind of wind down a little bit. And my TV muted itself. So the ghost was very active when he walked into my house. So he mutes the TV.
Nice.
And I could not unmute it. And he left it mute for like 5 minutes while I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So I finally got it unmuted, or it unmuted itself, right? Which, we know what that means. And then the bass bar on, you can put separate from the TV, and it gives you more bass sounds. Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah. Well, right after the TV unmuted itself, in quotes, the bass bar blew up and is no longer. So I had to have a chat with the ghost in terms of, okay, now in my house, please leave all my electronics alone, otherwise it will get very expensive for me. Everything was fine. And that night, normally if I'm having a ghost experience, I'll get visions in my sleep. They'll let me know things. But this one was different. And this one was the most joyful person I think I've ever had visit me after they were deceased. I can't explain it. It was like the whole night long, they were so happy to know that they were acknowledged and seen and that they lived. And there was so much joy. And I woke up happy, like I was not expecting that. But I just woke up in a whole different space and purpose with this violin. So I started talking with the ghost a little bit. And I said, I sometimes can hear things and sometimes I'll see things. But one thing I've never been able to do is when I ask for a name, I can never hear a name. And I think that's my fault, because that might make it too personal for me if I know a person's name. So I'm like, but is there any way that you can help me know your name? So that way you really feel like you spoke through the violin. And I heard him say, turn the violin around. So I turned the violin around, and I saw, of course, what I had been seeing, because I had already examined the violin. I mean, when I got home, I was examining this violin, every detail. Even on the inside, you know, there's something written in Hebrew and the year 2008, so maybe that's about the movie. Maybe it's when it was restored. I'm not sure. I don't read Hebrew. But, you know, I thought that I had studied every inch of this violin when I brought it home. And he kept saying, no, not the star, not the star. So I went up further. And I'm going to have you come in really close. Can you see this? Here is where there are two initials carved into the scroll. And it's not uncommon for survivors or people who were in the camps to write, scratch their initials or something into a violin, because that's their way of saying, I lived, I was here, I existed. And as soon as I saw that, my heart just went, oh, like, how did I miss that, right? So then, of course, I started looking at all the other articles again. I've been reading articles after articles as soon as I found out which violin was assigned to me. I never saw these initials MC. It might be a G, but I think it's a C. But I never saw any mention of these initials anywhere. So, of course, when I saw them, I went right back to the laptop. I started doing more research, and I'm starting to try to figure out who MC is. And when I couldn't find anything. So I went to the rehearsal that night, and we have a soloist who's playing Schindler's List, and he's traveling with the group. So he's very familiar with these violins. And I went up to him, and I didn't quite know how to ask him, but I just sat down next to him and said, has anybody ever asked about any possible ghost that might be traveling with the violin? And he got this big grin. He's like, no, you would be the first if you're having an experience. And so I started sharing what I was experiencing and what that conversation was. And I said, who's MC? And he's like, what are you talking about? And so I said, there's initials carved into the violin. And he's like, into the Bielski? And I'm like, yes. So he was even shocked. So I pulled it out of the case, and I took it over to him, and I showed him, and his eyes got really big. He's like, I have never noticed that before. So I think hopefully Saturday night at the concert, I will be able to talk with somebody even closer to this violin and find out who MC is. But in the meantime, that was my experience with MC and what it was like to have this violin and play on it this week. And it's what prompted me to want to play at least one piece and record it, because there's somebody that just really, really loved having this violin played. And it was a voice for this person this whole week long. So, Leave a Slide by Fritz Kreisler is what I will be playing, and I'm dedicating it to MC. And thank you for being with me for the whole week. It's not just historical, it's so personal what happened and what I experienced this week. It was the most beautiful life in a flow moment one could ever ask for. So when I recorded Liebeslide, I had mentioned MC, and I had said I was going to try to see if I can get more information. I know the soloist had said he would introduce me to the co-founder of A Violin of Hope collection, and I wasn't sure how that was going to come about. Before the concert, normally musicians, we leave the house as late as possible. We get down there in a reasonable amount of time, but we certainly don't get down there an hour beforehand or more. But this particular night felt a little bit different, and I kept feeling like I was just being pushed out the door. I can't explain it, but I had to go with it. So I knew this was getting down there way early, but I'm like, okay, I have to go with this flow. And it made me wonder if this had something to do with I would be in the right place at the right time to find out more information. I didn't know. I just went with that flow. So I get down to where the concert was going to take place, and I'm walking backstage, and there's this one section where I walk in the door, and then right there's tables. So there's a very narrow passage where I can walk around to where we can put our violin cases down. And in this narrow passage, there was a group of people. And the only way to get to where I wanted to go to put the violin case down backstage is through these people. So I was saying, excuse me, and I'm trying to, be very polite and get through. And then somebody said, oh, they recognized me as one of the recipients, and I was to play the violins. And they said, oh, this is the co-founder, right? He's standing right over there. This is one of the co-founders. And I'm like, oh, this is the person I wanted to talk to. And I'm thinking this to myself. And the timing is like, now I realize why I was being pushed, because something was pushing me for that particular moment. And so when I realized this was the person I was hoping to talk to, and I was literally going to have to push my way through a little crowd, I just stuck my hand right out, and I introduced myself, and I'm like, I'm playing on the Bielski violin. And he put his hand out, we shook hands, and we started up a conversation. And then, I get to that point where I'm like, so has anybody ever shared with you any unusual instances with the violins? People from the other side, and he kind of looks at me like, no. And so I just kind of launched, and I'm like, well, there is a soul that's around, and on the violin, there is an engraving, or he carved it out. And so I'm describing. And so he's like, oh yes, I know about the initials that are carved on there. I'm like, can you tell me about MC? And he's like, we actually don't know anything about MC. And I'm like, how is that? And he said, because when the violin, when he got the violin, it was so badly damaged. Most of these violins, all of them had to be fully restored. This violin was so badly damaged that the neck, the scroll, they are not original to the body of the violin. They had to find something that looked good with the violin and that would play okay with the violin. So he kept saying, it's not part of the violin. And I'm like, every part of a violin is part of the violin. So I'm thinking this to myself, and then he got more specific. He said, no, we literally had to pull out a box, and we found the scroll in the box, and we matched it to how it would work with the violin the most beautifully, everything else. And he goes, it literally came from a box of scrolls. And it was right at that moment I understood, because I heard MC, it was like that clairaudient side. He laughed, and he's like, without a scroll, you don't have music. And I'm trying to keep a straight face while I'm talking to the co-founder, and I'm like, oh, this explains why he was so filled with joy. Musicians, it doesn't matter if they're on the other side or this side. I realized it's like we had joy that we were selected to even play these violins. And MC, he had the same joy. It's like he gets to be part of sharing the music, telling the story, and of course he went, without a scroll, you don't have music. So nobody knows who he is, but what is consistent is back in those days, people did, they carved their initials out, you know, on things, just to show I'm alive, I survived, I was here once. So this is very, very consistent with some of the survivors, but we don't know the story of it, but we do know that MC is part of this collection, and this was just his chance to let it be known. So that's how he ended up being part of my whole week. Oh, okay. So I want to give you a follow-up on what I mentioned earlier about MC learning how to communicate through leaving change at my feet, like, you know, pennies or quarters. We had, just to refresh your memory, we had come to that agreement that he would find something other than anything electronic in my house or around me or my phone, because, you know, it would get rather expensive if he kept blowing things up, just trying to get my attention. So he did find that other way, and it was he'd leave change at different places, like right around my feet after I've been practicing, you know, on the Bielski violin. When I got home from the concert that night, it was kind of emotional, and I touched base with some other musicians, and they experienced some of the same things. It's like we had just been through a huge week, and I'm not talking musically, but musicianship-wise and historically, and just the whole topic of humanity. It was a really deep week. So a lot of us compared stories later that we had, you know, we got home and we were tired for just a couple days afterwards, and I was no exception. So when I got home, I just sat on my couch and I was just sort of decompressing. And then I was thinking, well, I wonder if, you know, if MC's around. I'm not sure. And I just wanted to thank him for the week. And so I did, and then I just asked for a sign. If you can even hear me, let me know. And I looked down next to me on my couch, and there was a penny sitting right next to me. And I don't have pockets for change to fall out. So this doesn't happen. I don't have change on my couch ever. It's like at the bottom of my purse, yes, but not on my couch. And it was a penny, which was completely consistent with his communication, because it was always one or two things that would be like really close to me, usually my feet if I'm standing, because I would be playing my violin while I'm standing. So I see this penny, and I actually I just had this release. I just cried. Like, it was like this really beautiful emotional week, and it just helped me just to release, you know, and just kind of clear it out. And so I put this penny right on the table that was right next to me, and it was on the corner. I knew exactly where I put it, because I'm like, this was really special. And so I put it right on the corner, and I went to bed. And then the next morning, I was going to go take that penny and put it into my collection of, you know, I keep this collection where I put, you know, all the change that I would get throughout the week when I was practicing. I was going to put it with the rest of the change, and it wasn't there. And I'm like, what? And so I start looking, and then I on the other side of the table, I found it on top of here, and on top of that penny was another penny, and they were just perfectly lined up. And I realized that was like a message. You have the scroll, you have the violin. And I'm like, this was just his way of communicating. So it was just through change. And it was just beautiful. So it was like, he just kind of lingered for the next couple of days, and that concluded it. But that was just my beautiful week with this soul on the other side, who is more than thrilled to be able to be a part of this collection and to help a violin have its voice. How is that last harmonic?
Well, the first harmonic was better.
The first harmonic was better. It's like hard to hit a harmonic when it's like on a totally different place than on my other violin, right?
Nice.
Yeah? Okay. We'll get one harmonic in there.
Absolutely.
Okay, oops. Did I just put a black smudge on my face? Just check my face.
Check your face.
Please. I just...
Maybe.
Yeah, right? See, look at that.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
That was an amazing first take. Yeah.
Oh, wasn't it though?
That was almost direct to disc. It's that good.
Wow. Well, that says a lot. Should we do another direct-to-disc?
The way they used to do it.
Better. Try
Direct to disc, man.
Oh my gosh.
Don't waste that wax.
Five paragraphs. And if I hold it down here?
Well, just turn a little bit to your left. Oh, yeah, there we go. That's better. Yeah, because it was just in front of your face.
Oh, like...
Yes, exactly.
If I make a mistake, I'll just stop
Stop.
and then redo the sentence,
That's right.
right? Because we can always edit it in.
Make sure you're facing more toward me.
How's this?
That's good.
Okay.
Okay, so
And-
this is what?
And is this like...
It's fine.
Okay.
Get your mouth out of frame so you can be. Yeah, oh, that's it better. Yeah, that's good.
Is my face out of there?
Yep.
So I see this penny, and I actually I just had this release. I just cried. Like it was like this. My hands shook, and I was sure people in the audience could see my heart just jumping out as I walked away. Hang on, I lost my place. Hang on. Oh, okay. Try this again. I'm going to try that again because I screwed up my word. We had joy. I'm going to try that again. I know the soloist had said he would introduce me to the co-founder of Violin of Hope collection. A Violin of Hope collection.
And it's okay. It'll be fine. We're not going to make you redo anything. Very nice.
See, now you heard my ghost story. I'm going straight to hell.
Your ghost story.